we've seen a number of suspicious and possibly fraudulent CoAs. And so we thought really focusing on this first presentation on sampling, with it being fall and a lot of farmers are out harvesting, knowing how to sample and then how to read a CoA becomes very important. So did you ever meet a person that was smart, passionate, and pleasant to work with? Well, to me, that sums up Kia Adams-Mikesh. She's the CEO of Adams Independent Testing. I've had the pleasure of working with Kia for about a year now, and she's going to share her experience with how to read CoAs, how to avoid fraudulent CoAs, and how to discuss field sampling strategies. Kia has helped establish Adams Independent Testing. They're one of the first hemp testing laboratories in the state of North Dakota. And she did this by leveraging her deep industry knowledge of federal regulations, testing operations, and software innovation in the grain industry. So she came from the grain industry and applied it to hemp. Adams Independent Testing is also working with Hemplet Farms on a grow trial study where we looked at 10 farmers and we looked at 3 different hemp varieties with differing soil types and latitudes to see how that impacted yield. And we'll be releasing our first annual report shortly. So with that, I'm happy to have Kia Mikesh give her presentation. Kia, you could take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. All right, let me just make sure. Can you see my screen? Everything looks good?
Yes.
All right. Okay, as you mentioned, with Adams Independent Testing, it was something that we actually started when the hemp bill went through. My family and I have been doing grain inspection laboratory work for, actually my grandfather started our grain lab in 1968. So testing we're very passionate about it. It's what we live and breathe for. And when hemp came around, we were honestly hearing a lot of things about laboratories and what was going on in the industry and lack of consistency. And a lot of industries that do this level of testing and use this level of machines to do the testing are used to things like pharmaceuticals and not working with an industry that needs testing immediately when harvest hits and, next day results and things of that nature, and customer service that's kind of around the clock. And so that's why we got into it. We felt that we could come in with just a different mindset with the grain industry. If any of you are also farmers of maybe soybeans, wheat, corn, you know that the clock doesn't stop for you. You're always working. And so we kind of take that mentality and we give people our cell phone numbers. If you need stuff, you let us know. If you're shipping your samples at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever it is, 8 o'clock. I've had people text me at midnight before and responding. So we're just trying to give a different atmosphere to lab testing and really trying to be a partner with people instead of being a hindrance, which a lot of times it has been. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So this is some of our people in our team. This is myself and my brother on the left, and we're the ones that started Adams Independent Testing along with our father and grandfather. And then to the right are 2 of our chemists that are working in there and running samples every day. So I'm going to go over a brief thing on types of tests. If any of you watched the last webinar I did with Hemplet Farms, I went over this pretty in depth. So I'm going to just give a brief synopsis of it. And then if there's any questions, I can definitely go more in depth later. So these are all the different types of tests that are done on hemp, and multiple of them you actually can dig even further into. But potency or cannabinoid profile is the main one that people will send in samples for, and that's going to give you the things like CBD, the THC content, CBG, CBN, all the different cannabinoids in there. And it's usually going to come in a percentage and tell you have 6% CBD or 0.27% total THC, things of that nature. We do pesticide testing. This is usually done on producer and the processor side to verify that no drift came over for the pesticides, maybe from other farms. There's just a very, very short list of pesticides that are allowed for use, or herbicides that are allowed for use on hemp. And so it's really to verify that nothing had been used and compromising that product. Heavy metals is something that is actually a very big test that's done, and that can get into the plant in a various ways. So there's the things like getting in through soil, getting in through water, getting in through fertilizer. We've seen all of those happen, and we've actually done some like research and development tests for people to see like if it was coming from different sources, and we've seen it from all of those. But the most interesting one was actually that we found that there was heavy metals leaching from like Rubbermaid type bins that they were actually storing the flour in. And so cadmium and chromium are actually used in making plastics for especially with like yellows and reds and recycled plastics. So there's a wide variety of ways that these can be introduced into your products, and they can be very detrimental to people, especially if they're smoking them, but the product is generally being ingested. So it's important to have compliance on those and have safety precautions. Mycotoxins are, I find those really interesting because that's a big overlap with the grain industry, but we're looking for things like aflatoxin and ochratoxin. And so those are essentially either like fungi that's growing in there. They're specific types like that are going on. And aflatoxin specifically is very dangerous to humans and compounds in your body. So if someone is, say, smoking smokable hemp, and they smoke one that has 5 parts per billion in it, and then they smoke again, and that one has 5 parts per billion in it, and they smoke again, it actually keeps compounding and compounding up in your system, and it isn't easily digestible. So that's one of the reasons why it becomes fairly dangerous. There's moisture and water activity to verify that there's no mold growth and things of that nature. Residual solvents, that those are more on the processor side and the finished products. So that's to verify that they've gotten all of, usually like ethanol, if you're doing ethanol extraction, or maybe butane, anything that's being used to extract the hemp into an oil, they're making sure that all that has evaporated back off of it. There is also terpenes, which that's kind of a hot topic for most people. So I was going to share a little bit more onto that. And on this next slide, I'll go into and actually show you what a CoA looks like. So this is a certificate of analysis, and this is what you'll get your results on for any lab. They're going to look a little bit different depending on what lab you go to, but they have pretty much the same core concept of them. So this is our specific one. We like to have pictures on them to make sure so you know what we're actually testing. So if you hand that CoA to someone else, or if you're receiving a CoA, if you, one of my favorite things is if you're receiving biomass that has a lot of stems and sticks in it and dried up hemp and leaves, but you see a CoA that's accompanying it that has buds, only buds on it, that is not going to work. That CoA does not correlate to the product that you're getting. So it's a way that you can kind of a quick check to make sure that that CoA actually makes sense for the product you're purchasing or using. It's going to show you the different compounds in there and what they're at. So the percent right here is our percentages, and you can see this one particularly says 7.068% CBDA. But then you go up here and see that there's total CBD 6.64%. Well, that's because there's actually an equation where you take the 87.7% CBDA and add on the CBD. And that's because the CBDA is the acidic form. So you're essentially taking the same equation that the USDA has for total THC. And the 87.7% is essentially saying 87.7% of it is going to get decarboxylated into the finished product. So that's where that comes in. Now we're seeing more of a trend where people are actually keeping things in the acidic form, and it's not getting decarboxylated all the time with the extraction methods. So it is important to look at equations and seeing what that total CBD means when you're reading. We have A lot of times there will be little summaries and telling you just a quick note if something failed or passed, but then on the subsequent pages, it's going to tell you a lot of detail on what pesticides were tested, what levels were in there. The limit of quantification is very, very important to look at. I'll explain that with the fraudulent CoAs, but that is telling you that's what the lab tested down to. So in this instance, we tested down to 0.001%. And that's very low. So we can detect a very low level of THC and CBD. Now with terpenes, like I was talking about, a lot of people will test this either to determine aromas or flavors. So that's very big in smokable hemp, but we're also seeing it a lot in the finished product in tinctures and other products as well. And there's a lot of talk and conversation around the healing properties of it. And I'm by no means an expert on any of that, but I can tell you how we test it and why I've seen people testing for it. And so we have this snippet over here on the right-hand side shows the different terpenes that we particularly test for. I cannot say them correctly, so I don't even try. But so one of the things that we actually tried to do in our CoA is try to make it as user-friendly as possible. So here we have myrcene, and that's one of the bigger ones on there. We have 3.54 milligrams per gram, and it shows the percentage per the sample, but right on the right-hand side, it shows that one of the primary aromas is hops. So it actually takes those and shows hops, cinnamon, pine, orange. So it kind of gives you the overall aroma or flavors of what that sample might have. We're seeing a lot of people extract terpenes out and use them and then formulate them in different ways. So Mark and I, my partner in this, we actually thought terpenes wasn't going to be a big test that we did, and it's underneath potency, the biggest test that we do. So I think people are using it a lot as a marketing differentiator for their products right now. So I talk about this a lot, how to tell if your CoA is fraudulent. And in this particular one, I went over it pretty in depth in the last webinar I did. So if there's any repeats, I don't want to bore you too much, but I feel it's important enough where I want to hit on it again. Also to note, on our website, I have a whole blog post that talks about all these in depth, and I have examples on there. I think this is a very important topic to be educated on so that it doesn't go past you. So a lot of those that we were seeing no's on, you very well could have seen a fraudulent CoA, you just might not have known it. Obviously we're a lab, so people bring their fraudulent CoAs to us and they'll have me analyze them and see, like, do you think that this one looks good or not? And I can help find red flags a lot of times. And I can tell you, I've seen a lot of fraudulent CoAs and from reputable places too. So, and needless to say, there is also the thing of there's fraudulence and also misleading. You may not know if they did it on purpose. There's just a lot of education with CoAs. So these are some of the quick tips I'll give you is check the QR code every single time you get a CoA. Check that QR code, scan it with your phone, and verify that the PDF or the physical form that you have matches what is on that QR code, but also verify that that QR code goes to a reputable source. We have seen that people are now also manipulating the QR codes to go to their manipulated PDF. So if it goes to some free QR code site, that should be a red flag to you to look into that further. But if it goes to something like Confident Cannabis, which is a LIMS system that a lot of labs use, or any other LIMS type system, then there's a good chance that it's good because it's coming directly from the lab server. Check the picture on the CoA against the material that you receive. So that's that scenario that I was talking about. If you're receiving biomass and you see that your CoA has just buds in the picture, it is not going to be representative. Those leaves and stems have substantially lower CBD content than the buds do. And so you're really going to want to see a representative sample in there. And then you will also want to look for the limit of quantification on there. The worst one that I've seen is that the limit of quantification was actually, I think, in the 2%, around there. So that means that the THC could be up to 2% before it said anything other than non-detect. So this CoA said, I think like around 15, 16% CBD, which is a red flag in itself. But it said 0% non-detect THC. And so that's something to look at. They don't even report if the THC is below 2% in that situation. When to test. So for producers, we've recommended, by working with producers, kind of develop some different things throughout the growing season. It's important to make sure that you are not going over on verifying your plants aren't going hot. We've actually seen that a lot this year. And it's a very quick kind of insurance policy, if you will, to make sure that your plants are good. And a lot of people use it as a gauge to know when to call the state to do the compliance testing in that way. When people are harvesting and drying, we recommend doing moisture sampling, but also moisture testing to see how dry it's getting before you're storing it in totes or anything, to make sure it doesn't produce too much mold. But also doing the potency test when you do a harvest batch, because we've seen that different harvesting methods will lower your CBD percentage. And after people get results, I've seen people hand sifting out stems and leaves and different things like that, because it lowered down their CBD to a point where a processor wouldn't accept their material. So it's always good to do little tests before you full-blown do anything, just to make sure that you're not wasting your valuable time. And then the full panel with pesticides, mycotoxins, heavy metals, those types, usually isn't done until the end, unless you have concerns with your soil or water source of pesticides or heavy metals. That's usually done before you sell it. Processors will almost always have a full panel before they take in producers' material to verify that there's no safety contaminants in there. And then they also will do purchasing off of those full panels as well. Throughout the process, we see a lot where the cannabinoids and the residual solvents are done throughout it to make sure that they're extracting the most that they can out of their product. We see a lot where the byproduct will actually be tested, and that's how they can see if there's any CBD left in that byproduct. And it's kind of a fun test to see each time that you're tweaking your process the best that you can. And then at the end, you're wanting to do full panels before you sell your product again. So sampling is kind of where my heart is. In the grain industry, it's actually, testing is very, very important. But if you don't do the proper sampling procedures, the test is actually not as accurate as you should have it. And so, especially when your plants are in the ground, I always tell people there's two different ways you're looking at it. You're either sending it in for potencies to see compliance-wise if you will be going hot for your compliance tests. So you'll want to sample exactly how the state would be sampling your fields, because you're going to want apples to apples comparison in that way. But then I've also seen people taking those compliance tests and then assuming that that translates over into what their biomass is going to be, and it does not. So at the top of the plant, it is generally a lot hotter than the rest of the plant. And then you higher percentages, but then you also are going to have where there's going to be more leaves, more stems throughout the bulk of the plant as well. So the CBD percentage or other cannabinoids generally lower quite a bit when you go onto the, when you sample your biomass. So we actually do samplings where producers will bring in the top, middle, and bottom of their plants, and then it'll give you a more generalized idea for what your biomass could look like. Representative sampling is, these are some of the things directly from the USDA for grain. And honestly, there's just not a lot for hemp, unfortunately. And so when we are talking with our customers, we're always kind of giving them some of that feedback. And we're wanting to tell them how to representatively sample. And the biggest thing is it's essential. If you do not do it properly, your final results will not be reflective of what your product is. In the USDA, we only allow official license holders. There are large licenses, pretty intense licenses you have to get in order to actually sample product. You have to go through strict procedures through thousands of pages of USDA handbooks and directives. There are very specific pieces of equipment that you have to use. You can't just use any old probe. You have to use a very specific type, brand, width, etc. And then there are also specific sample sizes that are needed based on carrier, and you can't lose a chain of custody. So when we go out to an elevator, we have a licensed person that goes out there, they take it. When they take that sample from the approved device, they bring it back, and at no point can that sample ever leave our hands. And that's how it's done in other industries. Obviously, hemp is a new industry, and it has not gotten to any point of that nature. But I think that it's interesting to note that there's a lot of things you can take from that the sampling is key in looking at that. So by all means, ask your lab, give us a call. We can go through those things, especially if you're a processor, of how to sample the incoming biomass that's coming in. It can save you or lose you a lot of money. Also, a quick note is that watch for cross-contamination. So this is our head chemist, Ben, and this was actually at a medical marijuana facility that we were sampling at. So they take things a little more extreme there, but we're in full-blown Tyvek. But we see a lot where people will, they have two different samples that they're worried maybe that there's pesticide contamination, and then they're kind of lugging those around next to each other. That pesticide can very easily go off on the other sample. So when you grab it, you're going to want to bag it right away and make sure it gets to the lab that way so you don't have cross-contamination. So that is what I have.
Kia, thank you for that nice presentation. We vet our speakers very carefully and we practice with them. So I trust Kia. I know she's a reliable source out there. She's listed her contact information. If you have any questions for her, feel free to contact her directly. But I wanted to ask a few questions from the group. You mentioned earlier about containers and how they may leach. If something is marked food safe, is that safe from leaching, or do you need something else to make sure that you don't get any impact from the container to the bud?
You know, from my personal experience, I've seen that if things are marked food safe, you have a lot better chance of not having leaching. Where I've seen it coming into play is when people are going to Lowe's or Home Depot and buying the Rubbermaid bins or stuff of that nature. And those definitely have heavy metals in them. It may or may not leach, but they do have them. And depending on the time that they're in there, it can happen. So that's where a lot of these tests come into play. Is you may not know that you have contaminants going on with your product, and you don't want someone to find out later that there is and then have the liability. So we've always kind of told people that these full panel testing, when you're doing it, you may feel like there's nothing in your product, but something could have gotten through that you're unaware of. And that's essentially your insurance policy. I loosely say that, you know, kind of an insurance policy stating my product is good. I vetted it. It is good to be sold, and I feel safe selling it.
So is there a container you recommend people use?
I don't. We try to stay out of that piece of it, but I definitely do recommend looking at food safe and looking at that.
Again, when we put on these webinars, they're not here to sell anything or promote any specific company, but we do have a question about testing and pricing. So can you just share with us, Kia, general pricing in the industry for CBD biomass and CBD smokable flower?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a variety on the pricing. One thing I will say is to watch when you're looking at turnaround time. Some places may look like they have good testing, but then you may have 3-week turnaround time, and they may charge you a 200 to 300% upcharge on your things for maybe 2 to 3 day turnaround time. I've seen that quite frequently. So those are things to look at. For us particularly, we have our pricing just straight out on our website. I don't know why, but labs are very secretive about their pricing. It's apparently very hard to find lab pricing. So we just put it straight on our website, hempinspection.com/pricing. So anybody that wants to take a look at it, it's just there for anyone to view. But for example, like a potency is $75, and that gives you think it's 10 or 11 cannabinoids at this point. And
Is terpenes included in that?
no, nope, everything is individual. So you'll hear a lot of full panel, and everyone looks at a full panel differently, and everyone has a different idea of what tests are included in full panel. So we kind of like made up, like, this is a full panel and this is a full panel plus microbials, and we just tried really laying out what tests are included in that. We used to do a la carte, but we're just trying to condense it a little bit, because some people don't consider microbials full panel and others do. And
well, I like the way you presented your terpene data, especially with the icons. That was very, very nice. So here's a tough question. How often do you recommend that people test their crop?
Yeah, so honestly, it really is a personal preference. So I've seen people that start, the second it starts flowering, they'll start testing like once a week. And I can tell you, when the second it starts flowering, it's not going to have high CBD or THC in it. But a lot of people will like it just for that data, so they can put it, in an Excel sheet and chart it out. And then for coming years, being able to better predict where their crop is going to be at and what dates. So I've seen people go that route. I've also seen people that have gone they want to do one test and kind of wing it and see. That makes me nervous, because I've definitely seen a lot of people come back with hot samples when they've done that. But I'd say sprinkling, at the minimum, sprinkling in there a little bit after flowering. And if it looks really low, then once it's grown a little bit more, maybe send in another set. And if it hasn't grown a lot, you kind of spreading it out from there, if that makes sense.
Here's another question. On a 12-acre CBD biomass crop, how many samples do you recommend taking? And that's also very state dependent too. But can you talk a little bit about the state and your recommendations on what's an adequate sample size?
Yeah, so actually the USDA has really good, they have stuff in the hemp section. They'll actually go through what the USDA recommends for sampling, and they have, like, if it's a 3-acre field, you do this much. They actually have a full chart on there that you can see how many samples you need from each field, and it'll actually show you the exact pattern you're supposed to take and everything. I highly recommend anyone that is farming hemp to look at that and see how they recommend sampling. Every state is going to do it a little bit differently off of that, but generally that gives you a really good concept of how most states do it, if they haven't adapted the USDA one yet. But I also recommend asking how your state itself does. One thing that I do know, the 12 acres isn't necessarily the big thing. It's whether or not you have multiple varieties in there. So varieties are, I have seen states that do not do it per variety. So that to me is not representative sampling. They can vary a lot, but so we've usually seen where we recommend people sending it in per variety. Then you know what those are. And then also for like pesticide testing, if people are worried about anything like that, honestly, if there's different sections. So if your 12 acres is all just in one big area, a big 12-acre block, you're good to go. If you get samples throughout it, you should be good. But if you have like 4 acres here and then they're kind of blocked off by a shelter belt, and then you have 4 over here and they're blocked off by a different shelter belt, and maybe you have a different water source, kind of section things off based on the things that could be touching your field, at least for full panels.
Kia, here's a question I have. 0.3 total THC is the bane of all of our existence. Yeah. You go over that and you're hot. When you present your analysis, do you present that as 0.3, or do you go out another decimal? So if somebody was 0.39, they'd be hot, but if you just showed it as 0.3, they wouldn't. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so ours particularly goes out, just trying to see if I can pull it up here quick. But so ours goes out 3 decimal places. So you can see that. And honestly, it depends on the state. Again, I've seen some states that will just drop it. So if it's 0.35, they will just drop the 5 and you're good to go. I know one state that did that last year and now has converted and isn't doing that this year. The USDA does not do it that way. It's pretty much a 0.3%. So more states are starting to go to the, you really need to be 0.3%. I would not recommend, unless you really know your state regulations and you're not leaving your state, I would not recommend going over that 0.3% total THC.
Okay, well, Kia, thank you very much. You did this on a volunteer basis. We know your time's precious, and you're very good at what you do. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Our next speaker can be best described as tenacious, persistent, and resourceful. Susan Candee is a second-year farmer from Wisconsin and is the president of Newport Acres Farms. Susan's going to show us how her can-do attitude keeps her in the hemp game. Susan, welcome to our webinar series.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's put your farm in context. So let's discuss your background first. What did you study in school?
My undergrad was in biology, business, and economics.
Wow, that's pretty diverse. Did you get a graduate degree also?
I'm working on the graduate degree in business, specializing in medicinal plants at the moment. So.
Wow, so we're well educated for what you're doing now as a hemp farmer. Why did you choose to become a hemp farmer?
The opportunity presented itself, Robert. I purchased property in Wisconsin that was perfect for farming in my mind, and I had the opportunity and the time to attempt growing hemp because the Farm Bill had passed, allowing hemp to be grown here.
Did you think hemp was an easy or a hard crop to grow before you started?
Good question. You never know. There wasn't a lot of information at the time. There's more information now, and I gave it a go last year, and I've learned a lot and did it again this year.
Christian, if you could share the video while Susan, you could talk and tell us about your farm. So tell us where your farm is located, how many acres you have, and how many acres are dedicated to hemp.
Located in South Central Wisconsin, and I've got about 85 acres here. 20 acres I've got growing in corn, organic corn, and I've got 3 acres dedicated to hemp.
And we could see that you're using raised beds there. Tell us, why did you use white plastic versus black plastic?
It's a flip of the coin in one hand because the other side of that plastic is black. I chose white for reflecting the heat rather than gathering the heat because I knew that the heat would not be a problem here.
One of the big challenges that people have around the country when growing hemp is weeding. Tell us how you were able to control your weeds.
I ended up mowing them down, with literally mowing them down and pulling them out by hand. It was a difficult issue last year, and I plan to have better timing next year with a cover crop.
You grow organic crops and you've decided to grow organic hemp. Why did you choose to grow organic versus traditional?
I'm from Boulder, Colorado, so everything's just kind of organic anyway. That's it.
That was the answer, huh? So what
Yes.
are the challenges of growing hemp organically that are in addition to just growing hemp?
Well, I'm growing outside, so that has its own challenges. I'm not growing inside a greenhouse. I'm not growing hydroponically. I'm growing organically. The biggest challenge would be the weeds, the pests, the weeds and the pests. I was lucky this year. I didn't have pests.
Do you find any economic reason for going organic? Does the cost to grow versus the sell price have a higher profit margin?
That's a great question. Ask me again in 10 days and I'll give you the right answer.
Okay, that's a fair answer.
But growing organically takes more labor and more time because I'm not using pesticides. I'm not using anything on the fields that would contribute anything I don't want to the plant.
Organic is really a philosophy on how you deal with soils. Are there any standards for growing hemp organically?
Indeed, there are. Wisconsin has the DATCP, which is the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Commerce, and they make sure that there are organizations that can certify that we are growing organically. So that involves soil testing, visual inspections, spot inspections, and I do have to pay for that, but I'm happy to because they can see what I'm doing.
So you're actually certified as an organic crop.
I'm certified as an organic farmer, yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's take a look back in 2019. That was your first year. What was the most important takeaway that you had from growing hemp in 2019?
The most important takeaway would be, what am I buying? Why am I buying this? In other words, which plant, seed, or clone am I going to grow?
Did you grow hemp profitably in 2019?
No.
So
no, I didn't.
Why did you continue growing after that?
It comes back to the can-do attitude. I didn't want to give it up. The plants I grew really, really well. It was my lack of knowledge of what I was buying, where I was buying it from. So it does come down to genetics. The farming part, I did okay. The business aspect, I could have improved had I had a buyer, but that's also improved this year.
Well, you hit on a couple of things, and let's carry on that line of discussion. You talked about genetics, you talked about growing the hemp, and then you talked about the business. So why don't we hit those three things, and let's start out with genetics. Do you use, so for 2020, do you use seedlings, or clones when planting your field this year?
This year, opposite from last year where I grew my own seedlings, this year I purchased seedlings and I purchased clones. And then the decision was, which clones, which seedlings do I buy? And most importantly, who do I buy from? Who do I trust?
And what was your biggest challenge in finding genetic suppliers?
Finding the right people, basically, with the right product, people that I could trust. Fortunately, last year I developed a great relationship with Jay Fentress, who introduced me to a group of people that I really believed in. And that's who I went with this year for my clones. And with regard to my seedlings, I went with a neighboring farmer who are acting as advocates for new farmers in the area. So that's how I made my decision, and I feel I made the right decisions.
Growing hemp starts with preparing your field for planting, to harvesting and drying your hemp crop. And there's lots of different things you need to understand because hemp's very different than other crops. Walk us through your growing experience and what you did better this year than you did last year, and where your challenges were.
All right, great. Well, the challenges last year and this year, that we'll get out of the way. Weeds and having the right connections. Once I figured out the genetics, I'm good. Preparing the field, it's how you prepare a field. Compared to last year, this year I used a raised bed and I blocked out the weeds in the closest vicinity to the plant. Fantabulous. Everything I did with the plants, I hand watered, I hand fed. I have a truck with a 65-gallon tank, and I watered each plant individually, making sure they had what they needed when they needed it. So keeping an eye on them was really good. That's the farming aspect. Having good young people, any people helping me with my weeding and watering was great. And I managed that this year.
as we talked earlier, you have a education or a background in biology. How much did that help with your baseline understanding of plant physiology in growing hemp?
Good question. I think it helped a lot because I know everyone knows that plants need basic items. They need good soil, they need good water, they need good food, they need attention. They want attention. Just like plants in the garden. This just happened to be a larger garden, 2 acres. And having my background in biology and knowing how the weather, the humidity, the latitude, the sunlight hours, all of that played into what it is that I'm doing here growing hemp.
You're not out of the woods in the hemp business till you sell your crop. So you can grow a great crop, but then you've got to harvest it, you've got to dry it, and you got to sell us. Talk a little bit about that harvest and drying process.
The harvest, literally harvesting was done by hand. We clipped every plant. I think it was about 3,500 squats in a couple of days. And I'm still walking. So harvesting everything by hand. And I happen to have a 160-foot barn on my property that I cleared out in order to hang the hemp. And it's just drafty enough and cool enough and dark enough and tall enough that that's where I dry my hemp. So you grow your hemp, cut your hemp, hang it, and then you have to take all those, if you're growing, you also have to know what you're growing for, take all those buds off the plant and the leaves off the stems. So.
Well, your crop sounds much like a handcrafted microbrew. A lot of this was done by hand with a lot of love and care.
Yeah, I wonder, I should be having a microbrew. Yeah. It's definitely handcrafted hemp for sure, Robert. Thank you. Yeah. When I see a handcrafted brew, and I'm working out in my field, I'm thinking this is a handcrafted hemp. Well taken care of. I know what's going on. I've touched every plant several times. And I believe it's turned out well. I'm very happy. I'm excited. Yeah.
Do you think the market will appreciate your care and reward you with a higher price for your premium product?
I'm very hopeful. But I don't know. I won't know. Again, we'll probably speak in the next, we'll speak again and ask me in 2 weeks, and I should give you a very positive answer. The market is active right now.
That's great. Well, if you're anything like us, we have learned a lot in our propagation business. We made a lot of mistakes the first year. We didn't make those mistakes the second year. We made a whole new set of mistakes. But our knowledge base continues to grow, and we learn a lot about the hemp business. What did you learn this year, and what are you going to do different for next year?
Testing. We're requiring testing. I've spent a lot of money on testing on my own accord to know where my plants are when they're growing. I wish testing prices were more reasonable, but it's part of my expense of making sure I know what's going on with my plants so they don't go hot. So testing, I would do more testing. I would actually ask the sellers, if I'm buying clones and seedlings, to let me know their testings. I forgot about that part. I would also consider the shape of the plant. Because now that I have been bucking the hemp, and I had the varieties differ, and how easy it is to remove the medicinal aspects of the hemp plant. So I would consider the shape of the plant. I would consider.
Does that shape also impact your density?
The density of the plant itself, or the density?
No, the density of the crop per acre.
Yes. Yes. I had some plants that grew tall and some plants that were more bushy.
Yes. So the last thing I wanted to cover with you is economics. It costs money to grow hemp, and to continue to do it, you're going to have to make more money than it costs you to grow hemp. So are you hoping that you're going to sell your crop this year at a profit?
Of course.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, I still have my day job, but my intention is to have a profit, because nobody wants to do anything where they lose money. And if I'm providing a quality, like top shelf product, it has what it says it has. I'm growing for CBG, I'm growing for CBD, and I've chosen great genetics. The plants have grown really well. I do want to be profitable. I have to break even. So,
how did you minimize your economic risk this year?
I didn't spend more than what I had.
Don't go in the hole to make money.
Yeah, my dad taught me that. You just can't do it. And I have a good connection of people this year, I believe. So
you're a sole proprietor. You're not a big farm. It's you and whoever you hire. That could be a daunting task when you're doing a lot of this by hand. Any thoughts or recommendations you'd like to share with our community?
With regard, if you want to do a smaller farm and you have a good group of people, you should definitely try it. I am so lucky that I have great people in my life willing to show up and help me work the field every day. Ryan Falk, Donnie Singer, Faith, Mary, people have come out and helped me with everything. And these are young people I'm happy to be working with. And I have to say the DATCP has been great with regard to coming out and being communicative about what I'm doing. MOSA has been great with regard to my organic status. And then the labs I'm working with. I'm working with a couple of labs, keeping track of what I'm growing, excuse me. But what it boils down to is having good people around you, working with you, and being kind to each other, working hard, because these kids really work hard. Yeah, I'm happy for that.
Susan, thank you for joining us on our webinar series and sharing your insight. And what's most important is that can-do attitude. That's what's going to make the hemp industry great.
Let's hope, right?
All right.
Thank you to you and Christian.
All right. Thank you very much. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, November 4th at noon Central Time. It'll be Don Robeson, the Seed Administrator for the Office of Indiana State Chemist and Seed Commissioner. He's going to give an update on the Indiana program. They've got new software that you complete your hemp application with. So he'll talk about that. He'll talk about the Indiana plan that was submitted to USDA. And he's also going to give his insight into the hemp season and what he's seen that's worked out there. So I just want to remind you, don't forget to vote. We're going to see you in November, and our webinar is the day after Election Day. So I'm sure that should be pretty exciting. I'm Robert Colangelo. I want to thank each of you for helping us make Hemp Day. Have a great week, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.